In the southern Gaza Strip, near the border crossing at Rafah, dozens of armed fighters from Hamas now find themselves trapped in a subterranean labyrinth of tunnels originally built to serve as both refuge and staging ground for attacks against Israel. According to multiple Israeli military assessments, the network of tunnels has been central to Hamas's strategy, concealing weapons, command posts and fighters, and enabling surprise operations in the territory. As the conflict has progressed, the Israeli Defense Forces have shifted their focus to isolating and dismantling the tunnel infrastructure, partly by carving off sections of the subterranean maze from one another. The objective, to reduce Hamas's ability to move fighters and materiel underground and to force engagements in more exposed terrain. What was once a vast interconnected network has, in Israeli strategy, become progressively compartmentalized. Each pocket of tunnel connectivity is being isolated, strangled of its internal lines of supply and movement. Following the most recent ceasefire negotiated by the Donald Trump administration, Israel pulled back certain forward positions, but not entirely. The result is that many Hamas fighters remain on the front lines, still underground, yet now constrained in mobility, facing dwindling resources and narrowing escape routes. The close proximity of militants and Israeli soldiers underground has heightened the risk of unintended clashes, miscalculations, and the escalation of a confrontation in confined spaces. The trapped fighters and the proposed deal. Hamas is now publicly demanding the safe evacuation of hundreds of its fighters trapped in the Rafah area south of the IDF-controlled Yellow Line in the southern Gaza Strip. According to diplomatic sources, Egyptian mediators have advanced a proposal that would allow these militants to disarm and exit the enclave in return for safe passage elsewhere, in effect a kind of negotiated exit rather than a surrender in place. The deal, reportedly under discussion, would require the fighters to hand over weapons to Egyptian authorities, disclose remaining tunnel locations, and agree that the underground grid be systematically dismantled. In exchange, they would be granted protected passage to other parts of the enclave or be evacuated under terms yet to be finalized. Within Israel, the Security Cabinet convened to review frontline reports and question the top military leadership about the fate of these trapped fighters. When asked whether deportation of the militants was on the table, IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir responded bluntly, "Absolutely not. I'm not in favor of releasing them. They should be killed." He added further, "As far as I'm concerned, they should either be eliminated or surrender." Civilian frustration and Hamas's internal dynamics. Meanwhile, in Gaza, there has been a marked increase in public expressions of frustration towards Hamas among Palestinians themselves. Many civilians now hold the Islamist group accountable for the devastation they say has been wrought across the enclave. Some have staged street protests, unusual in a territory where Hamas's rule has previously gone unchallenged. The reasons are manifold: the war's prolonged effects, the collapse of social structures, restrictions on movement and humanitarian goods, and allegations that Hamas used civilians, including women and children, as human shields. Reports suggest that militants have prevented civilians from fleeing combat zones by shooting non-lethal wounds, such as leg injuries, to stop them from leaving their homes with the fighters. At the same time, Hamas appears to have taken steps to shore up its internal control as its dominance has been challenged by the war. New policing and internal security units have allegedly been formed, while enforcement measures, including public executions and violent crackdowns of suspected dissenters, have been used to reassert authority. These developments come amid broader signs that Hamas's military capacity in Gaza has been significantly weakened, its governance structures under strain, and its ability to operate freely in previously uncontested fashion eroded by both Israeli operations and civilian backlash. On the ground, tunnels, fighters, and shrinking space. On the ground near Rafah, Israeli forces believe they have cut off segments of the tunnel networks and now track how the remaining fighters attempt to relocate or re-establish supply lines. The strategy by Israel has been to isolate each subterranean section so that it cannot resupply or reinforce others, thereby reducing the operational depth of tunnels and forcing combatants into shorter engagements with less space to maneuver. For the militants still underground, the consequences are acute. Escape options narrow, ammunition, food and water become more difficult to replenish, and communication with surface or other tunnel nodes is compromised. At the same time, the proximity of Israeli troops near certain tunnel shafts has increased the likelihood of inadvertent encounters, ambushes, deadly urban underground firefights, and the risk of civilian casualties amid confusion in the subterranean environment. Israeli planners believe that once a section of tunnel is completely isolated and its fighters contained, the decision point is clear: surrender or elimination. The graphic clarity of this calculus underlies Zamir's stark statements as referenced above. Political context and the broader war strategy. Prime Minister Netanyahu's government has repeatedly emphasized that Hamas must be defeated as a military and governing force in Gaza. Netanyahu has said that Israel's goal is not merely to remove Hamas's military capability, but to ensure it cannot re-emerge as a governing authority in the enclave. In parallel, the IDF under Zamir has approved expanded offensive plans, including eventual entry into Gaza City, the largest population center in the territory. The approval of the operational concept underscores the long-term ambition of Israeli military planning, even as ceasefires are negotiated. The friction between military and political echelons in Israel plays into this story. Zamir has privately expressed concerns that a full-scale occupation of Gaza could entangle Israel in lengthy governance burdens, while political leaders emphasize elimination of Hamas and territorial control. The Rafah tunnel situation is a microcosm of that larger tension. Do you negotiate exits and evacuation to avoid long urban war, or press relentlessly to eliminate every last node of resistance? The Israeli military appears, at least publicly, to lean toward the latter in this case. What this means for prisoners, hostages and civilians. Another layer of urgency around Rafah stems from the hostage situation. Hamas still holds Israeli hostages taken during the 7 October 2023 attack. And any Israeli operation in Rafah or surrounding tunnel zones must account for their welfare. Reports suggest the IDF is highly sensitive to the possibility that fighters in tunnels could use hostages as human shields or move them underground to prevent rescue efforts. The window for safe evacuation may therefore be limited, which adds strategic pressure to both sides of the negotiation. From a humanitarian standpoint, civilians in southern Gaza now face two dangerous vectors: remaining under combat conditions in and around militants' tunnel networks, and living in a zone where neither full Israeli governance nor Hamas rule is stable. Many remain displaced, shelters overcrowded, and basic services disrupted. Civil society in Gaza has begun to show signs of breaking away from wholesale support for Hamas, influenced by the human cost of extended warfare and the erosion of basic public order. The evacuation proposal under discussion, the evacuation in exchange for disarmament proposal, now under mediation, appears to offer an alternative to wholesale elimination of the fighters. The key elements reportedly include fighters hand over weapons to Egyptian authorities, disclosure of remaining tunnel locations, guaranteed safe passage to relocated zones or out of the enclave entirely under agreed conditions, simultaneous dismantling of tunnel networks as part of the deal. Hamas appears to be pushing for this outcome in order to preserve some of its forces for future governance or resistance operations. Israel, by contrast, has indicated that the preferred outcome is elimination or surrender, not relocation or deportation of fighters outside Israeli jurisdiction. The political dimension is large. If fighters leave Rafah and relocate either within Gaza or externally, questions arise about what happens next, who governs those fighters, and whether they reconstitute command structures. Risks and scenarios ahead. Several scenarios now loom. Successful evacuation deal. Fighters hand over arms, exit the tunnel complex, and relocate under supervision. Israeli forces then dismantle those tunnel zones and withdraw. This scenario offers the lowest immediate combat risk, but raises long-term questions about fighter reintegration or redeployment. Surrender in place, fighters remain underground, gradually run out of supplies, choose to surrender, and emerge under Israeli or mediator control. This requires close monitoring and potentially large numbers of detainees. Forced elimination. Israeli forces advance into Rafah tunnel zones, fight to clear them systematically, and kill or capture all remaining fighters. This carries high risk of casualties, military and civilian and heavy destruction. Collapse of the ceasefire, negotiation and escalation of conflict. If negotiations fail or Hamas refuses to make concessions, Israel may escalate operations and dismantle the tunnels without a deal. That heightens the danger of wider flare-up in Rafah and nearby border zones, possibly drawing in other regional actors. Strategic implications for Israel. The Rafah tunnel complex is a critical front. Controlling or neutralizing it shapes the balance of power in southern Gaza, limits Hamas's ability to strike, and sets the precedent for how underground networks are handled elsewhere. For Hamas, survival of fighters and tunnel networks matters not only militarily but symbolically. Losing the underground infrastructure would be a major blow to its narrative of resistance. For civilians, the outcome matters for humanitarian access, governance, reconstruction, and the long-term stability of Gaza. A negotiated departure of fighters poses fewer immediate risks of large-scale destruction, but does not guarantee peace. For regional diplomacy, notably Egypt and the US, the Rafah tunnel negotiation offers a potential hinge point. For a broader Gaza settlement, how the deal is structured could impact how post-war Gaza is governed, whether Hamas remains a power broker, and how returning civilians and international aid are managed. In Rafah, the underground war now approaches a decisive phase. The tunnel network that once allowed Hamas fighters to move freely and strike unpredictably is increasingly hemmed in. What happens in the coming days, whether fighters surrender, evacuate, or are eliminated, will reverberate far beyond the tunnels themselves. The dialogue being brokered under Egyptian and US auspices may offer a pathway out of violent confrontation, but only if the parties accept the trade-offs. The stark words of the Israeli military chief leave no doubt about one thing. In the eyes of Israel's military leadership, this is not simply about evacuating fighters. It is about ending the tunnel threat once and for all.